Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cosmic Echo, a Taylor podcast. My name is Lee Adams. I'm your host today, and I'm speaking with Christian Dockstader, who is an individual who has traveled the world and has used ayahuasca multiple times and other entheogens while he was traveling, and also runs the website TrueNorth.com, and he just shares his personal experiences with using these plant medicines and how they have changed him over time. And really, he had a lot to share and great information and a great perspective and attitude towards life. So, without further ado, let's just get to it. If you want to just give a little bit of a background of who you are and, like, I know you want to talk about your experiences and where you came from and everything. So why don't we just start with like a basic understanding of who you are and how you got interested in this experience with ayahuasca and psychedelics and your website and things like that. So just take it away, man.
Cool. So I guess I got to jump back a little bit. I'm actually I'm from a little town in Arizona, a little polygamous town. My parents are actually polygamous, and I grew up in a family with 23 siblings.
Whoa.
So I'm one of 24 kids, and this fundamentalist Mormon community. So basically, I was just raised in a really kind of strict fundamentalist patriarchal society with a lot of, those stereotypical values that a lot of people, if you've been raised Christian, are familiar with. So there's a lot of that kind of programming that I was raised with. And then I moved from there when I was about 20 to Salt Lake City and did some work for a mortgage company. That company moved to Vegas, which led me to Vegas. And that's kind of where I've been here for the last maybe 4.5, 5 years. And it wasn't until recently, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that I started to see some real significant changes, and I started to experience some things that made me kind of question how I was living my life and make some big changes. So that's where I kind of pick it up. But so yeah, for me, I really like your pieces about the hero's journey and writing about Joseph Campbell. Something that really resonates with me, just with what I've gone through. And ever since I read his Hero with 1,000 Faces, or at the beginning of the year, it's really kind of been a theme in my life. But my journey, I guess, well, it's funny because it's like you have the stages, right? And he talks about the call to adventure, and he also talks about refusing the call. So I had my call to adventure about, let's see, just almost 2 years ago. It was about January of 2016, I think. And I had this experience. Are you familiar with the philosopher Alan Watts?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I love Alan Watts. In this whole so the reason I love Alan Watts so much, to give you a little idea, is because with my background and where I came from, and then I left. I left when I was 20. So I left basically my whole model of the universe, my philosophy on the universe and existence and why I'm here and all that kind of fell through the floor. And I didn't really have a lot to stand on, because my whole, image of God and Jesus and Joseph Smith and all that just kind of fell apart when I looked into it as an adult. So for me, Watts was kind of something to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, it just made sense. Like, listening to him speak just made sense, and it helped me make sense of where I was at. It helped me get through a couple dark years. So I'm listening. Well, so to preface this a little bit, I had a roommate who, at the time, this is like I said, about 2 years ago, I had no real experience with cannabis at all. I'd smoked a few times, but nothing major at all. I was a lightweight, and he brings this bong over and to my house. So I end up hitting this vapor, water bong or whatever it is, and take way more cannabis than I'm ever taken before.
Yeah.
And I'm by myself, right? So I'm just like chilling, listening to a podcast or something. And And all of a sudden I start getting super, super paranoid, and this just tons of fear and paranoia. And I feel like I'm just like dying, you know? So I go up to my bed and I turn on some watts to make me kind of feel better and chill me out. And it was funny because it was like, it was random, but the combination of what I was experiencing with the cannabis and then listening to what Watts was telling me gave me such an incredible experience. So he was he was going into the nature of consciousness and talking about the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality. And he, you know, as you probably know, he's famous for having kind of brought Eastern philosophy to the West, and speaking about it in a way, you know, with his mastery of English, in a way that a lot of Westerners can understand and conceptualize, because you know a lot of these Eastern traditions, we don't have words in English to even describe what they're talking about a lot of the time. So for him to be the bridge for that, you know, and communicate it well is, I think, really cool. And there's a few guys like that, but Watts is definitely one of them. And so in his discussion of the nature of consciousness and talking about these Eastern concepts like yin and yang and polarity, and this idea that the self is really an illusion, in the sense that you aren't just one half of the coin. So if you've got yin and yang and they're opposite sides of the coin, you've got light and dark, you know, black and white, self, other, figure, background, you know, and the list goes on forever, because everything in the universe has polarity. And so when you think of life that way, and you realize that, you know, you are the lens for which you're viewing the cosmos, for which you're viewing reality, but you have to, of course, there has to be an observer for there to be a cosmos. There has to be someone to see the cosmos. There has to be someone to see the sunlight for there to be sunlight, right? And that's the you know, kind of what he's explaining, but obviously does it in a much better way than I could ever do. And just because of the state I was in, something just switched. It clicked, and I literally felt my sense of self completely obliterate, just dissolve completely. This is the first time in my life that it ever happened, and I just melted into oneness. And it was so funny because, like, I went from terror and fear and anxiety, thinking that I was dying, thinking that, you know, what did I do? I smoked a drug and it's killing me or something crazy, you know? And all of a sudden I'm in bliss and I'm in total oneness with everything. And that's hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it, but like to the point where you still have awareness, you're still aware of the situation, but not from the lens of an ego, not from the lens of a self. You're doing it through the lens of it's just almost lensless. It's just this kind of scope of everything. And I realized in that moment that life is the greatest game. Like, and I just started laughing. I couldn't stop laughing. It was hilarious to me at the time, because I'm like, why was I so worried? You know, and I just laughed. But and this is a common experience. You know, they talk about it a lot in Buddhism. This state of kind of feeling nirvana or satori or whatever they have different words for, and this laughing is associated with that, because it's just, you realize it's kind of a funny joke. But anyways, so I have this experience. I realized that life is just the best game ever, and you can really do whatever the fuck you want with your life. Like, you can just go and do whatever you want and play the game however you want. But I refused the call. So that was my call to adventure. I refused the call, and I didn't really make any significant changes in my life, even though I knew I should. I was in a job that was just paying me really well, but I hated it. So it was, you know, I made good money, but it was just hard for me to walk away from the money, even though I really did not enjoy what I was doing. I wasn't bringing any value. I was just like a mortgage loan officer. I didn't feel like I was really helping anyone and bringing any value into the world. And so going to work was just kind of a grind, you know, because you're kind of lying to yourself about what you're doing and just for a paycheck, and it sucks. So I kept doing that for a while. Yes, and I refused the call. And then about maybe 6-7 months later, well, actually, no, one more thing happened. This experience with Watts did do something, and what it did is it opened up my mind to the idea of new possibilities and trying new things a little bit. And so one of my buddies, he told me he was going to go up to Chico and California and meet up with this guy and try mushrooms. And I'd been looking into mushrooms for a long time, done a lot of research into it, but I was kind of waiting for the right moment. I was also kind of intimidated and scared. I'd never done psychedelics. So we go up and do them, and we were planning on doing like a 3-gram dose, which is a pretty sizable amount. I mean, it's not a hero's journey or hero's dose that Terrence McKenna would say 5 dry grams, but it's supposed to be pretty potent. But what we did is we did it in tea, and I don't think we did it correctly because we all got a really mild effect. And it ended up being perfect for me because it was like I didn't have this like crazy intimidating experience. I just had a really beautiful experience. We were in the woods by a river. Everything was just so beautiful, and I was just so blown away by nature. And it was just kind of a good time and made me feel good. But that kind of cracked the door open to this idea that drugs might not be this, or psychedelic drugs, they might not be this big bad thing that I've been led to believe my whole life. And there might be more to the story. And so I kind of went down a rabbit hole of researching it more and more and more. I have a friend who wanted me to go to EDC the last couple of years leading up to this, which is it's a rave. It's a big festival here in Vegas. And I turned it down a couple times because I'm like, not my scene.
Yeah.
I don't like, doing drugs and just dancing all night, which is kind of my perception of what it was. So now that I'd had this experience, these couple of experiences, he invites me again this year, and I'm like, okay, I'll go. Fuck it, let's see what happens. So obviously my intention is to do MDMA because that's like the place to do MDMA, right? That's where everyone's doing it. So I'm like, okay, this is where I'll try MDMA. I make sure he gets the, tested, clean substance, make sure it's all safe, because that's very important. And before I go like down this whole conversation, it's important for people to know, like, I'm not promoting that anyone just go out and do psychedelics. You've got to do a lot of I would advise, A, do a ton of research yourself so you know exactly what you're getting into, but B, approach it with intention, and know why you're doing it and know what you want to get from it, or at least have an idea of what direction you want to go with it. Because I've seen so many people who just, they're doing it recreationally, and then eventually that leads to abuse, and it just gives the whole thing a bad name, in my opinion.
Definitely.
So yeah, I end up doing MDMA. Long story short, it's probably the best night of my life.
Wow.
Like, in the sense that I felt just my heart open up to everything, to everyone. It was pure compassion and empathy for not just my friends who were there, which I couldn't stop hugging and telling them I loved, but I couldn't stop hugging strangers and telling strangers I love them, and I meant it too. That's the weird thing, is everyone like laughs, like, oh yeah, you did ecstasy. Of course you're just this little roly-poly lovey guy, whatever. It's just a drug. But until you experience the feeling of that, like, if you think about it, we don't, how would you define ecstasy? And my definition of ecstasy completely changed. The definition of the word ecstasy completely changed when I experienced MDMA, because then I was like, oh, this is the feeling of ecstasy. I've never felt this before in my life. I've never really known what ecstasy meant. I thought I had an idea, like overwhelming joy, euphoria, goodness, whatever. But then you experience that, and it's a totally different ballgame. And having that like unadulterated love for just the humans and every sentient thing on Earth was powerful. But the biggest thing it did for me, I think, was it gave me some self-love that I sorely needed. I realized that I hadn't been taking care of myself. I was in a job I didn't like. I was in a body that I didn't like. You know what I mean? And I wasn't really loving myself how I should. So that's where the real catalyst for change began, right there. So that was about a year and a few months ago. And yeah, so from there, I immediately, like right after that, started this, me and my buddy, like, started this diet. We've gotten this really good fitness routine right away. I ended up losing like probably like 35 pounds in the next couple of months, put on a bunch of muscle, just basically got a lot healthier. And then at the same time started exploring and all these other things that I was interested in, but I was still in the job I didn't like. I was still, it was one step at a time, and health was kind of my first step. So a few, like maybe 3 or 4 months later, my friends wanted to do another festival, and this one's in Washington State, at the Gorge, which is this beautiful outdoor venue where you can camp for a couple nights, and it's a totally different scene. It's like this is more of like the LSD scene, not the MDMA scene, and LSD is another thing I wanted to try, right? So we decided to make the trip up there, and I'm going to do LSD, and that's the first time I ever did that. And I don't want to like over glorify
Yeah.
drug use, but I had literally like an epiphany. I was just in a crowd by my friends listening to this DJ, and the lyrics or the words that came across were like, essentially it was saying, whatever transition you want to make in your life, make the change, right? And if you've done psychedelics, so you can kind of speak to this too, but it's that idea that sometimes the breakthrough is so stupid, like it's so simple, it's like obvious, you know what I mean? But it clicks in a way that never clicked before, where it's just like, oh, it's so obvious, I'm gonna do it now, you know what I mean? And it was like, yeah, I fucking hate this job. Why am I in it? Like, I have enough money saved. I can do something else, and I can figure it out. And when I got back from that trip, I quit. And at the time, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. So I got into I did a little stint with bartending, went and took a bartending course, had a job at a bar for maybe 6 months. But that didn't last long because of the next experience I had. And this is all kind of like, in my opinion, what happens when you accept the call for the hero's journey. Things start to change, like unexpected things. New people will come into your life, new experiences will present themselves, new opportunities, and it's stuff that there's no sense in trying to predict it, because you're never going to be able to see what it is that's going to make the big impact. The important thing is when you answer the call, like, you put yourself on the path, and you're in the position for those experiences to arise. And you know what I mean? Yeah. So I have this, I'm working, I just got hired at this bar, and then I'm listening to a podcast from Joe Rogan, and he's talking about sensory deprivation float tanks.
Yeah.
Which have you ever
Yeah.
floated before?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So I'd done it a couple times, maybe 4 or 5 times, but I kind of stopped because I was like, it's kind of expensive. I mean, it feels good, but I don't really need it that much. And then I heard his podcast, and he's like, you have to try it with edibles because it's a totally different experience. And I was like, okay, Joe's hasn't led me astray before, so I'll try it out. And I went and took some edibles and got in a float tank. And that was when I would consider, like, prior to that experience, I was not a spiritual person at all. After that experience, I would consider myself a much more spiritual person. So I had this sort of awakening type event, which I hate even saying that because it sounds so goddamn woo woo and weird, and you know what I mean. And I like having some logic and some science to back up everything that I believe and think and say. But at the time, I had no way of explaining this situation. So what happened was, I'm laying in the tank, and after maybe halfway through the float, I start feeling this energy, this tingling in my spine, the back of my skull, base of my skull. And this energy travels down my spine. And as it's traveling down, it's like pushing my body into like this I just knew that my body was not in the right position. Like I had had bad posture my whole life. I fell out of a tree when I was a kid.
Making me sit up right now.
Yeah. Well, I fell out of a tree as a kid and landed on my neck, and my shoulder, my posture's just been off ever since, and multiple injuries throughout my life. And so as this energy traveled down my body, it just like pushed everything kind of where it needed to go. And it felt like intense, but it felt incredible. It was like the best massage I've ever had. And but then it got down to the base of my spine, and I felt my hip. So this is where we go into the conversation about the surgery. When I was a teenager, I got diagnosed with the genetic hip disease. So it's a couple of my cousins have it, so it's a genetic thing. But essentially, you have like a ball and socket joint in your hip, and this disease is called skiffy, is when the ball keeps sliding out of the socket.
Okay.
And so I was dealing with that, but some pain when I was a teenager, and it kept giving me trouble. But then one day when I was snowboarding, it completely came out, and I had to go to the hospital, and surgeon decided to put a screw in it to hold it in. So it's a screw about like few inches, and so I've been living with that for the last 12, 13 years or something. And when I'm in the tank experiencing this, I feel this energy trying to push my hips to where they need to be, but it can't move my left hip. My hip's stuck because it's pinned. But then as the energy travels back up, I'm just feeling like these energy centers open in my body. It's just this crazy ass experience that's really hard to explain in words. But needless to say, I'm totally mind fucked when I get out. I Google like what's going on, this energy, like all this stuff, and I find yoga, and I find chakras, and this conversation about the whole energetic system of the body that apparently has been common knowledge in the East for thousands of years. And we've just been totally oblivious to it. And so that kind of blew my mind. I'm like, how come no one's talking about this shit? And then I realized when people do talk about it, it's like you're a hippie, you're woo woo, and it kind of gets shuffled under the rug. But there is a lot of actual information and factual information that they've been studying this with their best minds for thousands of years, and so it's definitely some wisdom there. And I was, after Googling around and looking into it, there's this concept of like an energy awakening or a Kundalini awakening, and it's this idea that you have this energetic system of the body, but when you're completely disconnected from it, we've been raised in a society that doesn't even teach you about it. So how would you know to cultivate it? You know what I mean? And then with injuries and with traumas as a kid and whatever, that you kind of get offline and you lose the connection. And I don't even know how long it's been shut off, like probably since I was a little boy. But I just realized that I was now reconnected, and so I was like, okay, I'm going to cultivate this. And I instantly got a yoga membership like the next day, started going to a yoga studio, and I've been an avid yogi ever since. So this tank experience wakes this energy system up in me. I start going to yoga all the time. I basically get on this path of like the stereotypical, hippie path or whatever you want to call it, where I don't know. And then the other thing that's really weird about it is it made me want to write. It made me like realize that, oh shit, these are important experiences. These are important ideas. I need to write this stuff down. And I started keeping a journal, and that started really having I felt like the benefits of that were tremendous, because it helped me articulate my ideas to myself, kind of where I was going to go next, what I wanted to do, what my plan was. So, that one experience, all of a sudden I've got like a health practice with yoga, which is also like a meditation practice, and then writing. And those are like my favorite things now. So it completely transformed kind of my go-to things that I was doing for fun at the time. I was part of this, party, just go to bars, drink every weekend, and then after that go to raves and party at raves instead. And that was kind of the cycle I was in, the cycle my friends are in, and which was, some of it were good times, but then I also realized that it's just not getting me anywhere to where I want to go. And I realized kind of the end result of where that path leads, and you kind of see people who have abused substances, who have abused alcohol, and it's so rampant in our society. It's almost like just a given at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah, the psychedelics helped wake me up to, and I would consider cannabis a psychedelic, because two of my most significant experiences in my life have been with cannabis. So I'm really encouraged by the fact that that's becoming, legalized, and that, with these trials with MDMA and trials with psilocybin and the work that MAPS is doing, and just the fact that this stuff's becoming more, if not legal everywhere, it's at least being talked about now, where people are starting to have conversations, which is really cool. And that's part of why I started the blog is, I wanted to write more. I knew it just felt good to write and to create things and be creative, which I never had like a creative hobby in the past. And so it was mainly for my own benefit, but I'm like, yeah, it'd be cool to write about things that people don't want to talk about, or people normally aren't used to talking about, and that need to be talked about, and, you know, be kind of shine a light on things that, you know, are significant. So that's kind of the roots of where the blog came from. I started it maybe a month or two after that experience in the tank, and it was mainly just for fun. Just started posting a couple things, but then, you know, as I was doing that, I'm like, I really enjoy this, and I'd had a couple of months experience at the bar at this point, and I'm like, bartending isn't the path I really thought it was going to be. You know, I was thinking of it like, oh, this will be social, it'll be fun, and all this stuff, but then the reality sets in, and you realize, you know, really hard to be healthy and have a night job, and especially when you're in a, you know, when you're in an environment where there's tons of alcohol and everyone's drinking all the time. You know, you're trying alcohols, trying beers, trying spirits all the time. And so I just found myself drinking more than I wanted to. And I also found myself like not getting proper sleep and all those things that are super important to health. And so I just decided it wasn't for me. And I made the decision that I was going to do something else. And so this is where I was like, okay, well, what do I do? And I had always kind of wanted to go to South America. So I was like, fuck, this is the adventure. This is called the adventure. Just do it. And so I decided I was going to just walk away from my job and buy a one-way flight to Costa Rica. The reason I chose Costa Rica was because of a guy named Graham Hancock. Are you familiar with him?
Yep.
Yeah, so I love Graham. He has a TED Talk called The War on Consciousness, which if any of your listeners, you want a really awesome, one of my favorite TED Talks. It's only like 18 minutes, and he talks about the nature of the war on consciousness or the war on drugs, and he goes into DMT, essentially talks about ayahuasca and these traditions in the Amazon, and then like in a totally random different time, I found this place called Rhythmia online, and Graham Hancock's right on their front page as like a testimonial. So I was like, holy shit, this is where Graham goes to do ayahuasca. This should be where I should go check it out. And so I booked there for a week. That was going to be the first kind of leg of my trip, and then I had no idea after that. And just got a flight, ducked out of town for a couple of months, like 2.5 months in total. But yeah, I don't know, man, that I guess if we want, we can jump into the ayahuasca conversation, but
Sure, yeah.
I feel like just that whole process came from me accepting the call, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think everyone's has those experiences in their life where they have an opportunity to step outside of their comfort zone. They have an opportunity to step outside of the box. And it's much, much easier to say no or to ignore it, you know? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've had, you know, the same types of experiences in your life, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everything that you've said has completely resonated with me in my life experiences, even down to the hip, oddly enough. So,
really?
We're more alike than you probably even imagine at this point, man. But so I want to go back to Mormonism and how you started getting involved into Joseph Campbell's work and the hero's journey, because most people you talk to and I talk to don't know what the hero's journey is about, what the underlying mechanism of that is, and what he really is talking about, like with myths and things like that. So with Mormonism, when you left, you were about 20, you said, or something like that, I think. That's when you kind of started changing. Were you still like a believer in Mormonism at that point when you kind of left your home?
So that's a good question. Yeah. I moved out when I was 18 for a short few months. So basically they have the group I was a part of, they have a missionary program.
Okay.
But it's not, it shouldn't even really be called a missionary program, because it's not, you're not going out on a mission to preach, right? Instead, you donate 2 years of your time. So either you get a job and you turn your checks in, or you go volunteer and you work in the community. And they have a program for all that. So that's what I did out of high school, which is like what most of the guys there do. They're really encouraged or pressured even to do it when they get out of high school. And not to go on too much of a
Yeah.
side tangent here, but like it's a very interesting dynamic in the community because they have a placement marriage system. So essentially, as a guy, you're not supposed to date. You're not supposed to be looking at, looking into relationships with girls at all. And you, so the idea is to be a good, guy, to be a good elder in the community is to go on a mission, and then that way the apostles or the leaders, they look at you as somebody who's a worthy candidate for a wife, right? And so that's kind of the pressure, that the reason why I went on the mission was because of that kind of social pressure. And then also I was up in the air about what I believed, and I was raised in this community. I still believed it. My job that I got took me to Salt Lake and then back eventually to Arizona where I grew up. But I got off my mission a little bit early, but I was still kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out at the time. And that, when I moved to Vegas, right after I moved there, I met a girl who I got in a relationship with, and just the fact that I think that was the catalyst, because she's obviously like, well, I'm not a polygamist, so you are, and you know what I mean? And so it was something that was obviously, it put urgency on the situation, made me think hard about what I believed in. But at the same time, I was coming across all of this evidence discrediting Mormonism and Joseph Smith in particular. So, and I don't know if there's any, I hate to be the guy that's like, I don't want to tear down anyone's view of reality or anything like that. But if any Mormons want a red pill, then it's called Letter to a CES Director, and it's a Mormon scholar who wrote a letter to the church with all of his concerns because of all this information he'd found. And I read that, and it shook my whole foundation. Then I met my ex. That relationship kind of just took me out completely. And over the next couple of years, I just got more and more comfortable, redefining my views of the world outside of that whole paradigm. Joseph Campbell didn't enter the picture until early this year, really. I was really into Watts and this Eastern philosophy, and obviously guys like Terrence McKenna and stuff like that have been really interesting to listen to. But as far as psychology and getting into Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, which are both heroes of mine now, that didn't start until the beginning of the year. Jordan Peterson was also a catalyst for that. Jordan Peterson's a guy who articulates Jung's theories very well, and I feel like they have a lot of commonality, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is the hero's journey to you, I guess, in reference to Joseph Campbell's work?
Well, so my opinion might be a little bit, I don't know if different's the right word, but so back to that Watts experience I had where I just felt one with everything. I don't think that life is serious. I don't think that it's. I think that the nature of reality is playful. I think that it's a game. It's a big act. It's a big drama. It's a big game of hide and seek. So we're playing hide and seek from ourselves, where we hide and pretend that we're just poor little old me. I'm just a little human with all these problems, and everything's so serious and intense and all these emotions. But then when you have little peaks of insight and realize you're not just this, you're everything. And I think that is the kind of the foundation of my view of reality. But within that, sure, that's the case, but you still got to live, right? You're still here. So if life's supposed to be playful, then let's enjoy it. Let's maximize it as much as possible. And to me, that's what the hero's journey is. I think it's realizing that you're the hero of your own story, right? And it's easy to fall into this mindset that you watch movies, you whatever, culture kind of portrays other people, celebrities, as like the ones that are the heroes. They're kind of the face. They're kind of the image of what's going on in society. And Instagram does that really bad. You see it in everyone else's story, and it kind of makes you kind of depressed about your own life. But realizing that you're the hero of your own journey, of your own story, and you can write that story however you want. And um, these myths and these stories, I think they're speaking to that human element in all of us, that human nature of what it means to go into the unknown and to go into the wilderness, into the other world, the otherworldly place where these things happen, these crazy experiences take place. Because you got to leave your doorstep, you got to cross the threshold, right? You got to leave your comfortable house before any of this stuff can really happen. And we're so we're almost like programmed, like, I mean, we are programmed to stay inside that box, to stay inside that house. I mean, there's really no other way. Like, when you look at the state of society today, why would everybody be in the mess they're in if it wasn't just momentum and programming and just everything in their environment working against them to keep them in that situation? And that's the sad thing, is that's the state of the world today in some places, especially in the West. I think that you have to swim upstream and fight a real uphill battle to be the person that just lives a healthy life and then is satisfied and fulfilled and does what you want to do. Like, you're an outlier if you're that person. You're in the minority for sure. And that's unfortunate. Like, we should be creating a society where that's what we promote all the time and everyone has. So for me, the hero's journey is, it's that process. It's this idea of recognizing the hero inside yourself, and and accepting the call and going out on the adventure, and you're gonna be radically changed. Like, it's just gonna radically change you. There's really no way around that. Like, that's the whole point of the journey, is that's what happens. And all these myths show that, with the heroes coming back with the, after they survive the ordeal, and they're coming back with the elixir, and they have this knowledge or this gift or this whatever it is that you took away from the whole experience.
Yeah. Um, with your adventure through the hero's journey, like, how do you see your progress right now? Like, because Joseph Campbell obviously talks about, like, very specific, like, objectives kind of through that, or
Yeah,
process, or benchmarks, you could say, through this
the
process.
roadmap.
Right.
Yeah,
So how
yeah,
does that apply
exactly.
to your own life?
Well, it's kind of tough to say, because to be in it and then to have that objective view where you can just stand back and say, oh, this is where I'm at in my life. Like, I might have an opinion about that, but I could also be wrong because I don't know what's coming next. I would say what's interesting is, I think it kind of applies on a micro and a macro level. For instance, let's take a psychedelic trip or a journey, as an example. I feel like you can go through the whole hero's journey in just one day if you're, on a psychedelic trip. Um, it's a roller coaster, and it's like you're going through the whole thing. And then when that's over, you're back to life, and you could still be going through a more macro version of a journey, that's over the span of months or years. And so for me, I mean, I feel like I'm definitely to the point where I've crossed the threshold. I've gone into the other world, and
Hmm.
I would even say had an ordeal. Like, um, ayahuasca is fucking hard, man. so
Yeah, let's
so
talk about that. Let's talk about your ayahuasca experience.
okay, sure. So yeah, so Rhythmia, back to Graham Hancock and Rhythmia, and
Get
making the
in,
decision to go
get
there.
into what ayahuasca is, because I mean, a lot of people listening to this probably will know, but I
Okay.
want to know what ayahuasca is, why you. I mean, you went there to have this experience, but ayahuasca is a very specific type of experience. So why did you feel a desire to have that psychedelic versus, say, another LSD trip,
Yeah,
and that whole thing?
for sure. So, if I was totally, a noob to psychedelics and like all that, I don't know if I would have gone and done ayahuasca. I most likely wouldn't have. For me, I'd already had, I mean, a really mild mushrooms experience, but then I did it again and had a full dose earlier, right? Like couple months before I went to Costa Rica, which was a whole nother story, which I won't dive too deep into on, right now. But essentially, I just hiked off into the wilderness with my dog about 5 miles up into a canyon and camped for the night and just did 3 grams by myself. And that was just a roller coaster. That was one of the toughest nights of my life. That was hardcore. So, and I would not recommend anyone doing that. Like, there's safer ways to have that experience. So anyways, for me, the difference and the big deal here with DMT, which is the active dimethyltryptamine, is the active psychoactive ingredient in ayahuasca. So they have the vine, which has the dimethyltryptamine in it, and then they have a leaf as well, which they brew together, and the leaf has harmine, which is a MAO inhibitor, I believe, right, which shuts off the enzyme in your stomach, which would normally make the DMT non-psychoactive. So in other words, if you eat a plant with DMT, you're not going to trip out because you've got an enzyme to protect you from that. That way we don't always trip out when we eat our food, because there's a lot of plants with DMT. There's thousands and thousands. So yeah, this concept of DMT is a little, in my opinion, different than other psychedelics. Other psychedelics, I feel like they change your state of, like, your perception. They definitely change, and you go on a journey and you can have so many benefits. But I feel like DMT has got another element to it. There's so much curiosity there and so much mystery there. Science has kind of proven that it's produced in the body. It's a natural brain hormone. A lot of people suspect it's produced in the pineal gland because of some studies on mice, which have shown that it's produced in the pineal gland of mice. And so if DMT, that's a great question. Like, so what is DMT and what is this ayahuasca experience? And I think going into it with a kind of an understanding of what it is very important. So in my opinion, and Graham talks about this in his TED Talk. So it's a great place to go. And if you can, you should throw the link on your site or something. But there's this idea, the one idea that kind of mainstream Western science has, which is that the brain is a generator for consciousness, right? So we don't understand consciousness completely, but we know that it's tied to the brain. It's inherently, like we can screw with the brain here. We can put a little electrode here, and you'll feel a certain emotion or something will change in your physiology. So we know your conscious experience is very tied to the physiology of your brain. And so the theory is if the brain dies, then or shuts off, then consciousness goes away, and it's just like a generator generating electricity, and there's no electricity if there's no generator. The other way of looking at it is less of a reductionist, materialist, scientific way, I guess, and that is that what if the brain is more of like a receiver, like an antenna, where you're receiving a signal or a frequency of consciousness, and where the metaphor would be like a television or a radio. If your television breaks or blows up, you still have the signal from the satellite that's got DirecTV, right? That's got the signal, right? So the television itself, the TV signal doesn't go away just because the hardware malfunctions or breaks. And that's the idea here, is that what if consciousness is outside of the brain? And it can exist outside of the brain, and the brain is just housing it, and it's just kind of the receiver of the antenna while you're in this body. So with DMT, when you bring DMT into the mix, now what if DMT is just nature's way, because it exists everywhere in nature? So it's funny to just lump it in as a drug. This is something that exists naturally all over the world, in all of us. So what if DMT is a substance that, when excreted in the brain, it's like adjusting the channel of the radio or the television. It's tuning into maybe a different frequency, right? So we live our normal life in this three-dimensional reality that everyone's used to, and we think of it as real, even though all real means is that we can all agree upon that it's all here. doesn't necessarily mean that that's this capital R reality and that this is all that exists. In fact, science has absolutely proven that so much more than we can see exists. You've got the light spectrum, and we've now got instruments to measure electromagnetism and light, and the visible light spectrum is like a fraction. It's like 1 or 2%. It's like, or maybe 4 or 5%. It's a tiny percentage of the actual spectrum. So what we can see around us with our eyes, we have horrible tools of picking up of reality around us. We have horrible instruments for sensory data like input. Our eyes are terrible at it. We can only see a fraction of what's out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's like 95% of what's out there that we can't see. And, you know, we can pick it up with X-ray machines and gamma wave machines and radio wave machines. And we have instruments to measure some of it, but there's still a lot of it that's totally unknown. So what if DMT is just tuning you into something that we don't perceive normally? So you have to... that's the big question. Is it something that you're just hallucinating in your brain, and it's just a drug that your brain is tripping out and you're going to see some stuff that's not there? Or are you being tuned into something that might actually be there?
Yeah.
Which is why ayahuasca is hard. Because sometimes, like, you're going to go through some experiences that are going to dramatically alter your perception of reality. At least I did. So... so that's kind of that's Graham's.
Yeah.
I took most of that from Graham Hancock. The way he talks about it's really smart. So for me, I was going into this with a lot of intention. I thought about it for a long time. Obviously, I mean,
what was the intention? I guess, like, I mean, you talked about what DMT is and the possibility of the science behind it, but what in that possibility was something that you felt like you needed to experience?
Okay, it's funny because starting out, my intentions at the beginning kind of morphed as I went through the experience, because it's one of those things where it's like you show up with this list of things that you want to achieve, but then you have an experience with ayahuasca and you laugh kind of about what you thought you needed to achieve. Like your perspective changes and you're like, oh, I focus on something else.
Yeah.
For me, I knew that there was still a lot from my past, from my childhood, that I needed to move on from, that I needed to grow out of, and that there was probably some trauma there that needed to come out. And, you know, I knew there were some things I needed to face and get rid of, some demons to face, some monsters to face or whatever. But also I was just very curious and fascinated about this idea that there might be a whole nother dimension or realm that you can tune into, right? And people have been experiencing this for thousands of years, and they've been making ayahuasca for at least 6,000 years, maybe longer. Some people estimate for as long as there's been humans in the Amazon basin. So you have to ask yourself, why has a tradition like that survived so much time and cultural upheaval? I mean, Cortez shows up in South America, fucks up everything, kills 95% of the population, either by murder or disease, and they burned all the records, all the books, all the churches. So you have a tradition that went way underground to survive all that, and they were very adamant about keeping it alive. So you have to ask yourself, why are they going to such great lengths to preserve something like that? You know, there might be something to it. There might be some wisdom there. Who knows? So those were questions that I had asked, and that's kind of why I had gone on the journey to go experience it for myself. Along with the intention, I just to kind of prepare, I wanted to fast, to kind of clean my body out, and I clean my mind. I mean, I don't know if you've looked into the benefits of fasting, but like I'm actually on a fast right now. I'm on like day 5 of a fast.
Wow.
And I feel pretty good. Like it's this kind of illusion. It's just this illusion that people think you have to eat all the time, and you don't. Like I feel solid right now. But I did a 7-day fast leading up to that. So it was just really, really potent, really strong right when I did it the first night. Because I was just like opened up to it, I guess. Nothing in my body that I had to really purge out. Like everyone else around me is puking, and I didn't puke once the whole night, or the whole 4 days. But I purged in a lot of other weird ways. So don't think you're not going to purge. Anyways, yeah. so I don't know if I covered that well enough about what my intention was, but the experience itself, um, the first night was just absolutely profound. Well, I'll preface it with this: the day of, we kind of had like an arrhythmia. What's cool about arrhythmia is you get a lot of integration, you get a lot of community, and you get a lot of like seminars and things
Hmm.
where you're actually having discussions and learning. You're not just going off and taking it and then like, kind of making sense of it by yourself.
Wow.
So one thing that their three big intentions that they have at Rhythmia are they want the plant, they call it plant medicine, right? They want the ayahuasca to show them what they've become. So show me what I've become basically means show me the shit, like show me the shadow that Carl Jung talks about. Show me the things that I'm scared of seeing about myself, and really hold an honest mirror up and show me what I've become. The second thing is to heal, or actually, the second thing is to merge back with your soul,
Hmm.
and that sounds like a really interesting woo-woo thing too. But the idea is that when you are born, you've got this body and this soul, and you've kind of got it in harmony, living together. But normally, at some point in the first 5 years of our life, we have some sort of traumatic event or experience, and there's a rift or a schism that takes place where we kind of lose connection to this intuition, this inner voice, this soul, whatever you want to call it, and this higher self, so to speak. And so, goal 2 is to reunite with that,
Hmm.
and then goal 3 is to heal your heart. Um, and I, what's crazy is like that sounds all whatever, but I actually experienced all of those things, and I think 90+% of the people that go to Rhythmia say that they've experienced those things. The first night I experienced all of the, I had the mirror shown, in front of my face, showing me the things about myself that I was shameful of. I got went through a lot of shame and fear, and then the biggest fear I think that a lot of us have is this fear of mortality, this
Hmm.
fear of death, and it's because we live so like, and I can say this now, but because in the past I had no idea, but consciousness isn't just your ego. So you perceiving the world in the lens of an ego, you got to understand that's just one lens, that's just one filter of how you can experience it. There's ways to not see things through the ego, and that's where I feel like meditation is such a key, because you can get to those states without psychedelics.
Hmm.
You really can. You can get to there just with your own mind. And so for me, I'd lived so much of my life just in my ego, and it was so real to me, and it was like I had all this fear about dying. So when I was experiencing the death of my ego, I thought it was real death, and it felt like real death. I mean, that's the thing about ayahuasca, and you can probably speak to this as well. It's indiscernible from real. Like you're experiencing something that is at the time real. So just the same way that we see the world around us as real, even though there's radio waves all around me, there's Wi-Fi all around me, I can't see it. You know what I mean? But if I had some sort of glasses where now I can see more of the spectrum, what is real to me would instantly change.
Hmm.
I would now, my definition of reality would shift. And so when you're in this DMT experience, your definition of reality shifts, and you are going through a real experience, is what it feels like. It's hard to differentiate that from anything else. So, dying feels like dying. It's scary. Uh, you know what I mean? And I fought it for a long fucking time. And you're not supposed to fight. Like they tell you, just kind of surrender and let ayahuasca do its thing. Because whether you fight or whether you surrender, it's gonna do its thing. You're gonna get there one way or another. It can be brutal, or you can let it happen. And I let it be brutal. For the first couple nights, I have a really hard time letting go and giving up control. So it's one of the things that I had to face was my fear of lack of control. And so, yeah, experiencing dying and being reborn. And the second I was reborn and felt breath come back into my lungs, I heard this voice. I and I don't know if I said this out loud or if it was just in my head, but I heard a voice that said, "I'm back."
Hmm.
And to me, that was like my higher self, my soul, my intuition, that inner that inner light, whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's so many different cultural ways to name it, but I felt merged back with that, and I felt like I was more my authentic self again. So it was a really, really profound experience. I was just like laughing and smiles the whole rest of the night. But the next couple of nights, because I did 4 ceremonies in total, the next couple of nights were extremely brutal of just dealing with inner fear, getting rid of shame and fear, and like it's not fun. It's work, and you're purging. But when you get on the other side of that work, it's like when you're at the other end of a hard day's work, it just feels good. Like I actually did, like that was good for me, and I know it was, and I got it out of me, and I did that, and you feel kind of like, I mean, for me, I felt like I took kind of like a stoic warrior approach to it, which was like, okay, man the fuck up, let's face this, and let's go get through it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that it needs to happen. And so I got rid of a lot of stuff, which I write about in more depth on my blog. I try to be pretty transparent about my experience, even though some of it's pretty personal, because I think just people getting a real insight into what's actually happening, and obviously you're not going to have the same experience as me, but what somebody experienced can give you some insight into what to expect if you're looking into it yourself. So yeah, a lot of work, but all three of those things, like I said, the showing who I've become, healing my heart, and reuniting with my soul, all that I feel like took place, and I just felt like a much lighter, better version of myself
Hmm.
with much more love. Uh, it's like if you think of that back to that spectrum of light, you've got really everything's just energy vibrating on the spectrum at different speeds. So the reason we see red instead of purple is red vibrates slower and then purple vibrates faster. So it's just a higher frequency. I think the same thing of any emotion. So love is going to be a higher frequency emotion and fear is going to be a lower frequency emotion. So I mean, it's common sense. And guys like Tesla say, if you want to understand the universe, think of it in terms of frequency and vibration.
Hmm.
So, and he was onto something
Yeah.
clearly, like he was centuries ahead of his time. So, I felt like as I left, I was just vibrating at a higher frequency. I'd gotten rid of so much of the lower negative fear-based stuff, which we all get, and some of it's really just unavoidable because you're just born in an environment of fear. Like that's just, I mean, if you think about it, man, like we're not too many generations away from some pretty fucked up stuff that's
Yeah.
happened on this planet.
Definitely.
I mean, and you carry it. Like I think there's this whole idea. I'd love to hear your opinion on this, but this idea of collective consciousness, and this idea of imagine an invisible field around the Earth that is connecting all of us. So it's our collective subconscious, so to speak, and it's like the internet, but for our consciousness. And each human being is a little node on that giant network. And so when someone experiences something, let's say they have an experience of a lower frequency thing like fear or something like that, then it goes into that grid, it goes into that network, and it affects the whole human race in some tiny, tiny way.
Hmm.
And that's the whole idea with the karma, is like karma, it leaves a trail, it leaves like a signature, right? When something happens. And people talk about Akashic Records. It's this idea of this field where it's all stored. And I feel like so much negative lower frequency stuff has happened to the human race by the human race. And, just like you think of the Inquisition, you think
Yeah.
of genocide like, the Nazis versus the Jews, and genocide like Europeans and colonialists versus the Native Americans. I mean, that's the worst genocide that I know of. I mean, we wiped out 95% of North and South America's population. It's
Yeah.
really, really
Brutal
just
stuff.
unbelievable when you think about it and how we've whitewashed history. So anyways, all that stuff is lingering, and I think that it affects us. And I think that you've got an uphill battle. Like you've got to fight through all that stuff and be one of the people to shift it in the right direction. And the good news is I think that shift is happening. I think
Hmm.
people are doing that.
It's interesting, man. Very good points. So with your experience, you went to Costa Rica, you had the ayahuasca experience, and you felt like you came out of that as a better person. And then what has continued on with you like since then? I mean, you did you stay there for a while and do additional work and then come back, or
Yeah.
what was that about?
Right. Rhythmia, just one last one on Rhythmia. If anyone's looking into it as an option, I would say if it's more expensive, but it's a really nice resort, and like I said, they provide a great community and a great uh, support system. I would say the biggest downside with Rhythmia is that they get so many people in there that you're in ceremony with 70 people,
Oh
60
wow.
people, and it's just that there's so many variables there and so much unpredictability. And if you go to a more traditional setting where like you have a more traditional shaman, they're never gonna let that. You know what I mean? They're gonna want to
Yeah.
have a more of a handle on the environment, so they want less people there, typically. And I just sometimes I felt like Rhythmia was a little bit haywire, where it's like anything kind of can happen
Oh
here. You
wow.
know what I mean?
Okay.
And it was
Yeah.
a little bit nuts. Um,
It's a good honest
so
opinion
after
there. Yeah.
yeah, and I just want people to know exactly. I want to be totally transparent about it. I love the people there at Rhythmia, but um, if you wanted a more intimate experience with a shaman, that's not the place. So, anyways, I went about traveling through Costa Rica, Panama, made my way to Colombia, just having the time of my life, absolutely loving it. And I think travel in and of itself, outside of, I mean, if you want a great way to open up your mind, you don't want to do any psychedelics, just travel, because get out of your comfort zone. And if you go put yourself in a part of the world where nobody thinks like you think and nobody has the same cultural background that you have, you're going to start questioning those things about your environment, because now that you're not in your environment, you can kind of see the impact that it's had on you. You can kind of see it for what it really is.
Hmm.
So yeah, so for me, traveling was just an unbelievable experience. I was a little nervous going into it because I'm like, oh, I'm going by myself. I
Yeah.
don't have any friends. And then I realized right away, you just meet so many cool people and meet new friends. And getting at, like, that was the best thing I could have done was buy that one-way flight. But I ended up, I wanted to get that more authentic traditional experience, whereas Rhythmia is a really good kind of entry point for someone who's not like from the West, who doesn't know much about what they're getting into and who doesn't want to go onto a deep dive and go into the jungle or anything like that. But I wanted to get a more authentic version of it too. So I found this place in Colombia. I ended up spending a month in Medellin,
Hmm.
and there's this little town up in the mountains by Medellin called Santa Elena, and they have a little retreat center there. It's just a cozy little quaint place, nothing like super fancy or special, but it's just absolutely gorgeous as far as where it's located. It's right in the mountains, and you have this beautiful view looking over Medellin below. But uh, the reason I got drawn to that place was because I wanted to try Huachuma or San Pedro, which is
Hmm.
like mescaline. It's a psychedelic cactus, and I contacted him. Ended up arranging it and going, and I kind of lucked out because I ended up going there the one week per year. They get this elder that comes up from their tribe in Ecuador.
Hmm.
So their healer, their primary healer, he's about 30 years old, and he's this tremendous guy. But the elder of his community, who's like 85, and he's been drinking ayahuasca since he was a little boy, like
Hmm.
multiple times a week for 85, like 80 years. So just think about that. Like
Yeah.
that guy lives as much in the DMT world as he lives in the regular world. So
Wow.
he's as well versed as you'll ever get in that realm. And so I had the opportunity to drink with him, um, which I just felt like fell right into place and is what I needed. But really, really weird coincidence. And so yeah, 10-day retreat there. did ayahuasca 3 more times, and that's where I thought that I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I got some experience under my belt. I've drinking a few times. I know what I'm doing. This is fine. No, 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 no. And the thing is like, not only is this guy on a different level as far as the shamans at Rhythmia. No, no. I mean, and like I said, I love the people there, but there's just they've got their experience and it's good, and they're absolutely helping people, and I love that. But then there's another level where we're talking like Jedi level. Like we're talking like Yoda. Like if you could train with Yoda, or you could train with even, I don't know, like even Obi-Wan. Yoda's a different level, right? And so I feel like that's what it was like. And another thing is they give you a lot more ayahuasca. I drank a lot more just because they give you a full cup. It's absolutely horrible to drink, but yeah, man, like, and this was my most recent blog post I wrote about this experience, but I experienced shit that I can't even describe. Like, first night I experienced kind of like I felt like the destruction of the world in 1,000 different ways, and I just experienced like all the different ways that this could end. And one thing that really stuck out to me too was this kind of concept of Christ, which and so without making this too confusing, the thing that this place is called Eagle Condor Alliance, right?
Okay.
And they specialize in ancestral healing. So they're not just trying to heal you of your personal traumas that you've maybe experienced in your life, which you definitely might see some of that, but you've got this idea that this collective karma, this consciousness that's holding the record of what humans have done, and let's say that it can transfer and travel through genetics and through bloodlines. So in other words, this idea of inherited trauma or inherited baggage, whatever, right? Which, interestingly enough, there's like a little bit of studies that have kind of proven this. If you look at grandchildren of concentration camp survivors, they did a study, and they're 300% more likely to be needing like psychiatric help, or like sessions with a psychiatrist. So I felt like I had so much of this darkness in my bloodline, and not to say I fucking love my family, obviously. I'm not talking shit on my bloodline, but what I'm saying is, like, when we probably all do, but I've just got a couple generations, or I don't even know how many generations of authoritarian, patriarchal abuse, sexual abuse, just all of this stuff, which some of it I found out about when I was on ayahuasca. You know what I mean? Like, stuff that you had no idea was a thing in the family, and then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, this is a disease that's been in my ancestors and in the generations before me. So it's crazy to wake up to that reality and realize that there's stuff outside of your little experience in the short amount of life that I've lived that's affecting this as well. And so the idea with the healing that they're doing there is that you can actually get stuff and clean out your bloodline and actually heal stuff from maybe grandpa, you know what I mean? And I absolutely felt like that's what I experienced. Yeah, I felt like I got, and a lot of it had to do with this idea of Christ, and this idea. I don't want to bash any religion, but I feel like the message of what Christ brought was one of love, obviously, right? And what's happened is that's been twisted, and it's been used to control people, and it's been used in a way that's really sad, honestly. I mean, like, how many wars have we fought, and how many people have been tortured as heretics, and all these things that we've done in the name of Christ. Obviously, that's not the message of Christ. That's obvious. But even now, even today, when maybe the violence isn't so much of a factor, we're still promoting some pretty evil ideas behind this guise of love and Christ, and I just saw it for what it was. I saw the pure message, and then I experienced first person the twisted message,
Yeah.
which took over my whole body, and I was everything that's wrong with Christianity at the time. Like I was possessed by it, and to the point where I was screaming at the top of my lungs in the middle of a quiet maloka where everyone's supposed to be completely silent.
Yeah.
And you got to imagine, like, I'm the observer, right? I'm in the passenger seat watching this shit go down. I have no control over my voice box, and I'm screaming and they're telling me to be quiet, and I would scream at him and tell him not to talk over me, and I would tell he would be quiet, and then I would like speak this profound message that I had for everyone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was just this absolutely bananas experience, and I just realized, like, oh my God, I've got like this authoritarian element in my genes. It's in my blood, and I got to get it out of me. You know what I mean? This controlling people and all that. And anyways, so it's taken over me, and they're trying to get it out. They're basically, I mean, I don't know if exorcism is the right term, but like they're trying to get this shit toned down. And I literally bail. I leave the Maloka. I'm like leaving, and they're trying to stop me. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm leaving. And they took 4 guys to pick me up and carry me back into the Maloka. They carry me back in, and the healer like rubs. He has this blessed lotion of some kind that he put on my head and my hands, and then they have these nettles. It's like a branch, which has all these really fine spines on it. And he whipped my back with the nettles, hurt like a son of a bitch. But what it did is it brought me back into my body, and it gave me back control. So I just after that, I wasn't like this crazy person screaming. I was laying on my bed silently, like rocking back and forth, like, what did I just experience, right? Like, holy shit. And shortly after that, I just felt the need to purge. Went out to the latrine and purged a demon, like literally, like the worst thing that's ever come out of me. And it was the most putrid, disgusting experience. As it came out of me, I was just like, that moment, like you shake, you have the chills, and you're just like, ugh, and like you get out of there and you don't want to ever look back. But yeah, so that's like, I would consider that like an ordeal. Like you're going through, you're gonna have to face some things, but I think the benefit that you can take away from that, and the message that maybe it's a message to bring to other people, maybe it's just in your own life, raising, your frequency and getting rid of those lower level things that are holding you back. But yeah, I mean, and then like ayahuasca normally does, at least for me in my 2 experiences with it, is the final day was just a beautiful experience of bliss and I mean, tears of joy. And they do the final day there, which I like a lot. They do it during the day, and you take a much smaller amount, and so you're out in nature and just absorbing it. And I don't know if anyone's ever done. I mean, if you've ever done ayahuasca during the day in nature, it's magical. It's beautiful.
Well, that's
At
wild,
least
man.
it was for me. Yeah, a lot. It's pretty wild, man. I would consider that pretty close to the deep end, if not the deep end of the pool. So I wouldn't recommend that people just go jump right in without, a lot of intention and research and knowing what you're getting into. I hope that having conversations like this will kind of
definitely
let people know kind of what it is they're getting into. But
I think it will. Yeah. That's the goal, man. You brought up your story actually started making me sweat, like in a weird way. Like, I usually don't do that, but it was starting to remind me of some of my experiences that I kind of forgot about, and I'm like, oh, it's coming up again. So that was interesting, man. Well, what is I mean, do you have this desire to have those experiences still again, or is it kind of like you're turning a new page to your book and you're starting on a different way?
So I don't feel the need to drink ayahuasca anytime soon, if that answers your question.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm in actually a pretty good spot. I think that the process of growth is never ending, obviously. So you're gonna always find yourself in, something you want to change, or something that's holding you back, or you find yourself slipping back into a rut. And my goal is to not be complacent. I think the biggest wake up call to me was that I was living my life in so much fear and complacency, and not really living it on my own terms, and not taking steps to live it on my own terms. So now that's kind of my goal, is to just only occupy my time with things that I want to do. So that means not working in a dead end job for someone that I don't, want to support, and something that doesn't bring me any gratification. And so realizing that you can be free from the bonds of the psychological bonds of money, and realizing that money is in itself is neutral, and you can operate from a field and from a viewpoint of abundance and love, and realize that money's going to come into your life if you're doing if you're bringing something positive into the world, and you start a business, or you start something that's helping people, the money's going to figure itself out. And that part of it, I'm not even worried about. It's getting away from the chains, because in a lot of ways we live in modern day slavery. It's crazy. Like, people are completely oblivious to the fact, but I have friends that are very, very wealthy who live in the same cycle on repeat. You know what I mean? So it's like having the amount of money in the bank isn't necessarily freedom. It's a mindset, like being free. And obviously, if you're tied down by endless bills and you don't have any money to pay them, then you're not free either. So you got to use it to your advantage as a tool. And so that's kind of like where I'm at right now. Focusing on that. I've been since I've been back, I've been focusing more on that. I've been so to this. I want to talk about this surgery I had, because it's kind of the chapter I'm in right now. The final ceremony of the 10-day retreat in Colombia was a San Pedro ceremony, and San Pedro is a really beautiful medicine, really awesome plant, because it's psychedelic in a way, but like you're having these experiences, but you're centered, like you're focused, like I could concentrate, and I could think, and I could focus. Whereas ayahuasca takes you all over the place, and you're really, on a roller coaster. San Pedro, I felt like not only was it able to focus and meditate and think about things and think through things, but it was really heart opening as well. So it's just a lot of love, a lot of positivity, and it's just a really awesome experience in that environment that I was in, which they take it all very seriously. Their ceremonies are very traditional and tons of intention, and it was really powerful to do it in that environment. And I think there's an element of that we definitely don't have in the West, or we did, but then we killed all the Indians and now all the Native Americans, and we destroyed their traditions, and so they've kind of gone away. But it's funny, because this mescaline tradition and the peyote traditions come from the indigenous tribes of North and South America. So it's the traditions that were here before we kind of wiped them away. But for me, I was able to, all these things were coming up in my head about what I was going to do next. And I was able to just figure out the next move with so much clarity. It was just like, oh, I'll do that. And it was like I was this direct connection to my intuition, and it wasn't like, oh, that's logical, I'll do that. That makes sense. It's less risk than this other option. It was more like, oh yeah, I know that that's my path. I know that that's what I need to do. And I just knew it was. And so I'm just going to go do it. And that's, I think, the difference between knowing and thinking something, right? Or believing something. So one of the things that was obvious was this screw in my hip. My fucker's got to come out. Got to get rid of this metal in my body, right? And so I instantly decided I'm going to cut this trip short. I was going to travel for about another month. I'm going to cut it short because I want to get back and get it taken out and have some time to heal it and recover, because I'm planning another trip. I'm actually just booked my flight the other day to Asia, and I'm heading to Asia right before New Year's. So I made the decision to actually kind of another totally side tangent, which we don't have to jump into, but in the middle of all this random craziness, I fell in love with this girl,
Oh,
and we're flying to Asia together and
oh,
all
neat.
that. So I wanted to get back in time to heal for that. And so yeah, so that was one of the big decisions I made um, in the ceremony. So now that I'm back, right after I got back, scheduled surgery, went and got it taken out, and I've been floating. I've been using float. I got an unlimited membership at a float center, so I've been using float tanks probably 4 or 5 times a week.
Wow.
And I like to pair that with yin yoga,
Mm.
which for anyone listening who's not familiar with yin, it's basically, I recommend it to anyone, but it's basically a style of yoga where you're not active in poses. So you're not sweating. I mean, it's not super hardcore. I mean, you might sweat, but it's not super intense. You're laying on the ground, and the whole point is to detach from any muscle engagement. So you'll get into a pose, and then your goal is to just breathe and let go of everything and let gravity pull you into the pose more. And as you do that, as you release the muscles, you actually get into the fascia and the connective tissue of the body, which is where we store a lot of emotional shit. We actually, and that's proven. Like I've experienced it. I mean, it's kind of proven. Obviously, it's Western science needs to catch up, but they're starting to show this quite a bit. For instance, like a dog, when a dog like slams its tail in the door, the first thing it does is it lets out a yelp and it shakes its whole body. And the reason it shakes like that is because the initial trauma from the pain of the event, it shakes it out. It like gets rid of that emotion right away. We don't have a good, like we've kind of lost touch, and we don't really have a good method for processing things that happen to us, emotion and trauma and things like that. And so I feel like if you hit adulthood, you're carrying a fucking cart full of stuff
Yeah.
that, you know what I mean? And like all of a sudden I'm in a pose, and all of a sudden doing a hip opener pose, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about this, experience I had where my brother left me when I broke my hip, and we were snowboarding, and he put me in the car, and then he went back and started snowboarding more, you know what I mean? Which we've totally like worked through it, and I love him to death and all that. So there's no issues now, but it's funny because it all surfaces when you're in the pose, and
Mm.
all of a sudden you want to cry or you're angry, and you're like, why am I experiencing this right now? And you'll see people in yoga classes just crying and like all this emotion coming out, and it's because we actually store it in our fascia tissue, which you have to access. You have to relax your body. You have to disengage your muscles to access that. Enter float tanks. No better way to release everything than in a float tank. You
Mm.
can completely let go of all physical engagement. And so I think that's what happened with the experience back in January in the tank. Is I was relaxed, and somehow the cannabis plays as a catalyst where it kind of speeds that process up, I think, because now I can go and I can connect to that energy and open up my chakras without
Mm.
cannabis. Like I don't need it anymore. I think it's like one of those things. It's more of just a catalyst to help wake you up, but it's like a muscle. The more you're familiar with it, the more you can access it, the more you can refine it. And I mean, everything's like that. Even your mind, like that's what meditation's for. Is it's realizing that. I mean, our mind is the biggest tool we have, right? Like
Mm.
everything we experience in the universe and in reality comes through the lens and the filter of our mind. And for some reason, we don't think it's important. A lot of people don't to hone that in. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like no mindfulness practice or
Mm.
meditation where you're actually focused on just your mind itself
Yeah.
and focused on what's going on in your mind. People are usually just a subject to a nonstop train of thoughts that never end. So yeah, I don't know. Like for me, I've used floating and yoga to kind of get back to where I needed to be. It's been crazy, man. Like had some really crazy experiences. Even before I got the pin taken out, right when I got back from Colombia, and I did my first float in like 3 months, right? Because I'd been out of the country, and I did it with some cannabis, some edibles, and I have this experience where I feel all this tightness, and I've been feeling it for months, right? But this tightness in my low back and in my hip, and I decided I was like, okay, I'm going to send my awareness to that area. I'm not going to be in my head. I'm going to go to where the actual stuff is and analyze it from there. And when I did that, I like instantly resurfaced this memory, and or two of them actually. But it blew my mind. I don't know if you'll believe this, but I literally experienced being circumcised.
Hmm.
Like I experienced being circumcised as a baby. That experience didn't just go away, like it's stored in my body. And I found out the location of where it was stored, and it was causing a bunch of discomfort and problems in my body. And I resurfaced it, and I just cried and cried and cried in the float tank, and
Wow.
had all these crazy emotions like betrayal come up. Like, why the fuck would they do this to me? I mean, I was just born, and now they're going to do this to me. You know what I mean? and so that, I mean, I was kind of on the fence about circumcision. I hadn't really looked into it much.
Yeah.
After that experience, I'm like, whoever's circumcising their kids has got to just be an adult, look into it a little bit. You realize the history of circumcision is a dark one.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to put a baby through that trauma. There's no medical reason. There's no hygienic reason. There's none of that. So we need to end that one right now. There's still 25% of American males who get circumcised. So it's pretty weird.
Yeah, it is bizarre, man. No, I believe you from your experience, because I've experienced very similar things, especially through yoga, and then psychedelics. Definitely, very very similar experiences, man. So what are some ways that people can get a hold of you? And I mean, you have the True North project. Talk about a little bit about your website,
Sure.
and how people can kind of read your blog and get in and reach out to you and learn more about your ideas.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So the blog is kind of like my method of making sense out of anything that I experience like that, and anything that I find is worth sharing. That's what the blog is for. I don't have a picture of it on the logo on the hat here, but the logo is just an astronaut in the lotus position meditating inside of a compass. And so for me, I think images are symbols are powerful. So for me, I thought a lot about what I wanted the logo to be, and so what it means to me is like the astronaut is this idea of the explorer, right? So I mean, he's a modern day hero. He's out in the wilderness, he's exploring, but the physical world, whether it be space or even the ocean or the physical world around us, has been mapped pretty well, and it's been I mean, obviously we've got a lot to discover, but I don't think that the frontier of discovery that we should be focusing all of our energy on is the physical world. I think it's consciousness. And there's so much to explore there, as you know. I mean, like that seems like that's kind of the theme behind your whole blog and your podcast. And it's really fascinating to see like these experiences like lucid dreaming and astral projection and psychedelics, DMT and things like that we don't really have answers for right now. And so I want to write about those type of things and be the explorer. And the compass is this idea of true north, and the compass is finding things that help you get your bearings, right? So I like to write about things and talk about things that I think help people and make their lives better. So anything that's done that for me, that's what I'm going to share. So if it's a trip with ayahuasca, and I want to write about how it's done that and how it's helped me and how it's helped me find my true north and get closer back to where that true north is. So that's kind of the idea behind the blog. It's just truenorthproject.net if anyone wants to check it out, and Instagram's truenorth_project if you want to follow along. But yeah, I'm going to be writing next about, I've got some x-rays for from the hip with the pin in it. And I'm going to get some follow-up x-rays when I get back from Asia. Because when I go to Asia, I'm doing a month or two in India just doing yoga. So I'm going to be doing a yoga training and really focusing on upgrading my body, and also doing some Vipassana, which is like a silent meditation retreat for probably 10 days. So I'm going to be kind of just going deep into my body, deep into consciousness, and getting hopefully the benefits of what that has to offer, so I can write about it and talk about it in an educated way that can give people a good insight into things like that. But wherever there's wisdom, wherever there's truth all around the world, I want to go experience those things and write about them.
That's awesome, man. Well, we'll be sharing your website and everything on the blog as well. So, thanks,
Cool.
man, for taking the time and sharing with us your your views and this journey that you're on. It sounds like it's a lifelong journey. It's very intense, and it's taking you some pretty cool, interesting places, I think.
Yeah, it's so crazy to think that I mean, all of this has happened in the span of 18 months to, I mean, less than 2 years. You know what I mean? Everything that we've talked about pretty much. So, especially that trip to South America, that was only 2.5 months. And I felt like it was 6 months, at least 8 months, 12 months of a life. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
so much experience fit into so little amount of time that my perception of time changed. Because you're not in the same rhythm, you're not in the same rut or routine that I was doing before in Vegas, driving to the office, going to the gym, going home, same thing over and over, right? And and so at some point your brain just stops filing that away as relevant data because it's the same. So why would I remember it? So you have like long stretches of your life that you might not even remember well. And like doing this trip blew my mind. I was like, wow, like you can slow time down. You can literally slow time down and get more out of life just by changing it up and getting out of your comfort zone, like getting experiences that you know you'll remember. So yeah, it's been an adventure, man. But uh, it sounds like you've been on one too, like with leaving the military and all that,
Yeah,
right?
definitely, man. Lots of change, dude. Yeah.
Huge turnaround. Yeah, it's cool to
Yeah.
see. It's cool to see people coming together and talking about their experiences because I feel like it's happening to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a lot more common than I ever thought was possible. And the more
Hmm.
people I talk to, the more I hear similar experiences from my own experiences coming out of their mouths. You know, like a lot of what you said is like
Yeah.
almost word for word for the experiences that I've had and the things that I've learned. My journey has taken me for about 10 years now to get close to pretty much where you're at. So mine's a little bit slower paced, I'd say, than yours, but
Well,
it's
I
getting
don't
it's
I don't
yeah, it's the same
I don't
place.
know if there's a yeah exactly, but I don't know if there's like a s- a set scale to measure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like everyone's on it in their own journey and their own path, and so you can't use one person's metrics to necessarily measure your life. If that's why I think, I mean, if I could leave any advice for your listeners that
Yeah.
I've like gleaned, uh, it's being mindful and like right. You know what I mean? Like even if you're not a writer, even if you're not posting it, like just putting the ideas on a page will a let you know, it'll make you figure out what you think, right, which is so important. But b it'll allow you to make changes because then you'll be able to actually articulate where you want to go next. And the problem with people being stuck in this like stagnation or whatever in their life is, how do you make changes if you don't know what you want your life to look like? Like if I don't at least have the imagination and in place to like formulate an image of what life should be like for me in a year, in 6 months, you know, then how can I get there? And it doesn't make sense. It's like you're shooting for something that you're not even aiming at. And it doesn't make any sense not to have some sort of practice where you at least take some time introspectively. And and I think meditation is there's a book. Are you familiar with Sam Harris?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, he has a book that's called Waking Up. He just came out with, and he has his Waking Up podcast and an app, a meditation app now called Waking Up, which is awesome. And he's just a really educated neuroscientist, dude who can talk about it in a smart way, and in a Western way that makes my left brain feel good and logical. But at the same time, he's gone to India and done 2 years of silent retreat,
Hmm.
or and gone deep down the meditation rabbit hole, so, and studied with all the gurus, so he's got a lot of good things to say. So that's a good resource if anyone wants to look into meditation more. But I think meditation and writing and getting out of your comfort zone, uh, that's one way right there to initiate a hero's journey, because you're gonna start to come across some things that are calling you to adventure for sure.
Great, man. Well, thanks for sharing with us about that idea and your information, man. It's been great spending the time with
Hmm.
you and learning a lot about you. I didn't know much about you before the interview, besides what you wrote on your podcast, and It's amazing how much information that you provided and the commonalities that I have in my life experiences to your own. So thanks, man.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's been great being on here. I appreciate you having me. And sounds like we still have lots to talk about if you
Oh,
want
yeah,
to do it again.
definitely, man. This episode of Cosmic Echo was brought to you by our patron supporter, Shogun. If you enjoyed this episode of Cosmic Echo and would like to learn more about Christian and his work, you can visit our website at taileaters.com/CE podcast. Additionally, you can support this podcast by clicking on our donation page located at the same website. Or if you'd like to continue the discussion, you can do so by clicking on our community tab located at the same website. We look forward to bringing you additional episodes in the near future, but until then, happy dreaming.